Welcome to Richard and Greg, a channel dedicated to discussion, debate and argument on a whole array of topics. In today's video, we discuss whether Donald Trump really does have coronavirus, and if so, what this could mean for the US elections on the 3rd of November. So let's go to that discussion. Welcome to Richard and Greg. The date is Friday, the 2nd of October, 2020. And it was announced earlier today that President Donald Trump and his wife, Melania, and his assistant, Hope Hicks, have been diagnosed with coronavirus or COVID-19. And all three of them are now in isolation. However, there is a conspiracy going around that suggests that perhaps the president does not have the virus at all, but is using this as an excuse for one of three possibilities. The first is that he will hide from debating Joe Biden because the first presidential debate by all commentators on both sides of the fence was that Trump was an overbearing bully and lost the enthusiasm of the public. And so by avoiding those debates avoids further damage, but also at the same time will enable him to then suddenly announce that he is better because of some miracle cure that he is launching before the election. The second theory is that the president, knowing that he's going to lose in the polls, is pretending to be ill so that if he does lose, he can use that illness as the excuse for the loss. And the third conspiracy theory is that he's pretending to be ill, resigns as president, enabling Mike Pence to be the candidate so that Mike Pence stands a better chance of winning the election, while in the interim, whether he's elected or not, Pence will have the ability to pardon Donald Trump and his family and his friends for any crimes they may have committed. These are the three conspiracy theories, and of course, the fourth theory is he is genuinely ill. So without further ado, we shall ask our long-time friend, but I have to say, long time since we heard from him, friend, controversially Greg. Greg, where the hell have you been?
Well, I haven't been deliberately avoiding COVID or news of COVID. I've been having battles with computers. There is nobody locally at the moment who is working on computers, astonishingly, because of various lockdowns, and it necessitates going into other people's houses and the like. Eventually I found somebody who could deal with the computer. They were some distance away. I took the computer to them, and it was an incredibly simple problem once he had worked out how to open the computer. It was clogged with dust. This had meant that the heat diffusers, the heat sinks in the computer, weren't dissipating the heat. The fan was working overtime and still not managing, and the computer was producing Jabberwocky, the ancient language of. So now I'm back and looking at the conspiracy theories that Richard has just announced. I hadn't heard all three of them. I had heard that there were conspiracies. I personally don't think there was a conspiracy of any sort. I think there was just rank stupidity and bad management on the part of Trump, who has been thoroughly dishonestly downplaying COVID-19 since he first realized it was a serious killer disease in February, when he is firmly on the record as having said that he realized but he didn't want to worry people. As a result, many of the actions have been far from on time. They have been far too moderate. He's made a big thing of being a bully and a braggart with many of the people who were trying to save lives, like local governors and the like, who were imposing lockdowns, and Trump was so terrified of what it would do for the economy that he was overruling them, sending in troops to manage their state, when realistically he had no moral right to act in that way. But we've all come to understand this is the manner of Trump. What he says isn't necessarily the truth. His contributions to the society, despite his comments to Biden in the debate when he said, "What have you done in 47 years?" Well, considerably more in 47 years. He's been elected repeatedly by the people who wished him to act as their representative. Unlike Trump, who has only been there for a relatively brief period of time, and more is coming out about his financial situation, and he was in such a deep hole he couldn't stop digging all the way through the debate, and made himself incredibly unpopular, even with many of his own supporters who suddenly saw through him. He has not helped himself. Then, to find himself in a position where he has been diagnosed as having COVID-19 together with his wife, I think must have come as something of a shock to him. He will try and play this down. I'm fairly sure of that. He will try to keep working, but he is in a very dangerous situation. Personally, 10% of people in their 70s who get this virus die. And one of the great factors that increases the percentage chances are poor health, and there is no doubt that Donald Trump is morbidly obese, one of the worst vulnerabilities for this disease. I hope very much that he survives. I hope everyone survives. But unfortunately, that is not to be for 207,000 Americans to date. But due to the handling of COVID, America has 4% of the world population, but has had 20% of the world's deaths from COVID, which is a fairly frightening track record. And they're not out of the woods yet, as the fact that their president and his wife are now self-isolating in the White House. And there is a very good chance that others amongst his key staff will, over the next week, find that they are also testing positive for COVID. There is an old Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. But personally, I find they're getting a little too interesting.
Well, I have to say, Greg, I'm very disappointed you don't think there's a conspiracy, because I thought this would be a very useful and interesting conversation, but you've popped the bubble. Going back to your comment, though, you are undoubtedly aware, and some of our listeners are aware, I am neither a Trump fan nor a Biden fan. I think both of them are past their sell-by dates, and America could do better, regardless of which end of the political spectrum you may happen to be. And I tend to be more focused towards right of center than left of center, but nevertheless can appreciate someone with talent, someone with capacity, and someone with a degree of humility. And I think to a large extent, neither of these two candidates have all three of those traits. Now, that said, though, it's not for us. We're British. We have no impact whatsoever on the American thinking or on the eventual election results. But nevertheless, I have to jump slightly to Trump's defense here. Because to quote you, Greg, you said reactions to COVID have been far from being on time and far too moderate. And I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that. But do you think other world leaders have performed better? Because we're even finding now in the United Kingdom, for example, so many counties, as we call them, maybe the equivalent to the American states, although much smaller, are now back in lockdown situations. So have we performed better here or in Europe or in India, where the actual virus is now excelling to such a point there are more deaths and infections in India now on a day basis than there are in America?
Well, there are somewhere in the region of 1.3 billion Indians, whereas there's only 350 million cowboys on the other side, if we're going to equate it to cowboys and Indians. I think that America has classically mishandled it. You'll find that if you look at Britain, we have had a major problem in that forced on Britain during our period as a vassal state of the European Union, we had the demented concept of devolving the government of these United Kingdoms into little Mickey Mouse regions, making a complete nonsense of a national policy for dealing with national events like our National Health Service, our national defense, our national health pandemic, and the like. This has led to confusion. We've also had people who outstrip even Richard in pandering to the policies of conspiracy, where large percentage of our population are daft enough to think that the government has introduced COVID with the sole intention of controlling the people, and that they wouldn't take a vaccine because it would only be there to make a profit for given individuals, amongst whom are Bill Gates. Quite honestly, I look at politicians and have done in pretty much a detailed manner for most of my 70 odd years, and I don't think politicians have the cohesive ability to cooperate with others in a manner that they could possibly orchestrate and maintain the secrecy of any form of major conspiracy. Somebody would be trying to point score against whoever's conspiracy it appeared to be. They have enough trouble finding their way from A to B without help and assistance from lobbyists and rafts of advisors and think tanks. We used to appoint our politicians on the basis of here's the job, get on with it, here's your salary, and here are your expenses. Now, they sit back and do very little but showboat, whilst they pay out a fortune of public money, pandering to lobbyists, think tanks, and advisors who actually do their job for them. It's got into a bit of a muddle, in my opinion. One of the problems that America has had is that, being a very large country, different parts of America have responded at different speeds and at different times to the pandemic as it spread. But that still puts America with not a vast population in global terms, only 350 million out of the 8 billion people on this planet, with basically one of the highest rates per million and one of the highest number of deaths. And let's ignore the highest level of people who have the disease. That's a matter of purely how much of other people's money you chuck at the problem, because the more people you test, the more people you find have it. It's the deaths that matter, not the numbers who have it. I'm in a very lucky position. I was selected, random selection, for the Office of National Statistics, sent me 10 pages of guff to read, which I must admit I didn't read, and a covering letter saying it was a research project, and would I be prepared to enter the research project? They would give me a swab test, one a week for 5 weeks, and then one a month thereafter for a further 12 months. And I thought, this is wonderful. It's doubly wonderful. They send a young lass round to the house to do the test. I don't even have to go anywhere. Then they asked if my wife also who else lived in the house? And I said, my wife. And they said, would she be prepared to do it? And she agreed. So we both do it. Having signed up for this, I'm all in favor of being tested. Come and test me anytime you like. The sooner I find out something's wrong with me, the sooner I can start doing something about it. And also, I felt that it is probable that since we're on this test, and it actually said in the documentation, that we might well find, if we became positive, that we were eligible for trials of new drugs. Well, anything that will keep me alive, I'm in favor of. So we signed up for this. Having signed up and they'd taken down all the details they wanted, they said, where do we want our vouchers sent? They're even paying us to do it. And by the time we've finished, we will receive shopping vouchers between us for £900. So I've been very lucky. If you can get yourself on the scheme, I can't see a single solitary disadvantage.
Okay, Greg. Well, in view of that, how do you see this American election, which is due on the 3rd of November, progressing? You've got Donald Trump now in isolation, at least for a week or so. There is still the potential that Joe Biden, who recently, as you know, conducted the first presidential debate, and we don't know as yet whether perhaps he has contracted the virus. Apparently, he's tested negative, but there is a sort of period before signs and symptoms are shown. How do you see all of this panning out with with just over a calendar month to go?
They've got 31 days in which to get out of this muddle. Already, in my opinion, the election is based on, as is so often the case in politics, voting for the least worst. It's a very, very long time since anybody of any caliber that I can think of has actually even wanted to stand to be president of America. And it's been pretty thin on the ground in this country as well. Politics has become such an unpleasant occupation, perpetually hounded by the media, who seem perfectly happy to invent stories and drag everything into the gutter in which the media tends to live, that who really would want the job? And surely only somebody with a completely dysfunctional marital status would want to spend most of their time at the far end of the country, surrounded by the sort of people who seem to go into politics these days. So I see the American election as very difficult, because I personally think Trump is an embarrassment, as became very obvious to the least aware of his own electorate during the debate, where he was boorish, bullying, and a braggart, but didn't show any signs of competence, compassion, feeling for the people he was supposedly electing. And it's just me, me, me all the time. Biden, I think, is probably a pretty genuine sort of bloke who has been in politics, as Trump kept on pointing out to the audience, for 47 years, and he's done a pretty steady, if somewhat pedestrian, job. Then we had Trump dragging the gutter to make himself feel at home, denigrating Biden's son and exploiting his son's death, when many will be aware, probably not as many in Britain as would be aware in America, that Biden's wife and daughter were killed, leaving his other child without a mother, having lost his sister, and being brought up by his father at some distance because his father was in politics, and a very difficult time was had by all as a result. And to see Trump deliberately exploiting this to try desperately to look at competent in his own right, I found utterly nauseating. I think America has a problem.
So is the election going ahead? Because I have seen headlines where people have said that although technically, according to the Constitution, the election cannot normally be delayed, but what happens if both candidates are out of action? Will they just go ahead without the candidates participating?
They'll go ahead without the candidates participating. If both of them, heaven forbid, were to die of COVID, then it would be their vice presidents who would move up one. I think it is becoming increasingly morally impossible to have the Supreme Court election at the same time, and I think to try to do so would be morally very, very wrong and would undermine the validity and integrity of the Supreme Court forevermore. So I think that should be put on the back burner until the new president is in office, whoever that might be. Then we also have to bear in mind that the recently deceased Supreme Court judge, her last words to her granddaughter was that she didn't want the election to take place until the new president was in office, because of course it would be an obscene abuse of power to grab the opportunity in the last dying months of a presidency to befoul the name of the Supreme Court. I also think that the election must go ahead because that is the Constitution. Should they wish to change it in the light of what has happened, so be it. But they will have to change it once they have a new president in situ. That new president might well be Donald Trump, but until he is ratified as president, he is, from now until that ratification, merely one of two candidates.
Well, Greg, he is still technically the president until the 20th of January, but I take your point. And of course, let's not forget that the nominee who President Trump has put forward for the Supreme Court justice position has been in close contact with Donald Trump herself recently. And who knows, perhaps she may have caught the coronavirus pandemic, which would undoubtedly then stop the necessary hearings going ahead in the time frame, at least, that President Trump would like to see. Anyway, it's interesting times. Greg, are we going to catch up with you in a couple of days' time on another scintillating topic?
By all means. I'm always happy to discuss almost any subject with you that you feel would be of help to others. Disagree with me, I'm perfectly happy to be disagreed with, but what my aim with these podcasts is to make people think.
Well, we certainly will do that. I'm just disappointed that you don't like conspiracy theories. Right, Greg, thank you very much. Speak to you soon.
Thank you indeed, and good night.
We hope you enjoyed that discussion, and if so, kindly subscribe to our channel and press the bell sign so that you are notified of our videos as and when they are published. And also in the description box below, we place links to certain books, articles and programs which you may find of benefit, and for which we will receive a small commission should you purchase through our link. And this will help support our channel and to enable us to develop it further.